You can follow it. We'll go through all the picks with you. We have video highlights of some of these players. We'll give you our insight from what we've talked to college coaches about, technical directors, coaches throughout MLS. Plenty of information. And don't forget, you can tweet at us using the Supplemental Draft hashtag. So I don't
them earlier in the day, whether it's Chris Wondolowski, Jeff Lorenowitz, Dan Kennedy. These are the kind of talents you can find in the supplemental draft. Some teams do better homework than others. Let's be frank. There are going to be teams here who, maybe just playing the game here, but really are not really counting on much in this supplemental draft. But there are still some big names out there, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, we had guys that were going in our super draft who dropped down to the supplemental draft. Yep. We'll see. Time will tell if the coaches know more than us or if we knew more than the coaches. But some guys like Ashton Bennett, who some people had going as high as the first round if you looked around mock drafts all around the league. Ryan Clark, who I know you liked out of the University of Monmouth. There's plenty of talent here, Simon. Give me a couple names that stand out to you of players who are still available and who could make an impact this season.
We talked about Eric Schonely. He is the center back, highly touted. Some had him number 1 on the center back depth chart going into the super draft. But after a combine in which he really didn't get to show off that aerial ability that made him well known in the college ranks, and at the draft, you saw him compared to other players, and he was a little bit slighter of frame. We didn't see, I think there was a concern that, can Eric Schonely fill out here? I think he's going to be one of the first players taken in this first round, frankly, because based on what we heard, his aerial ability was so good that in MLS, it's going to be a weapon that someone's going to want to use.
Yeah, and I think really the question that it comes down to with Schonely is, can he put that weight on? Some guys are slight build, and when you look at some of the forwards, I mean, imagine Bright Dike going up for a header with Schonely. You'd lose Schonely. You wouldn't be able to see him behind. So can he put on the weight? Can he become an impact player in MLS? And I think the interesting thing that we're going to see here is teams now have a little bit more leeway to develop players. So you can take a chance on a guy who's not MLS ready. We're hearing a lot about what's coming in the new reserve league setup, and we should hear more on that this week. It's going to be more games. You're going to see these players in competitive matches, and they're going to develop ideally faster. I think that's what everyone's goal is. So when you look at the players who are going to be taken today, they don't necessarily need to be guys who are going to jump right on the field and have an impact on the MLS roster, but you're going to see them in action and you're going to see them develop over the next couple of years.
Absolutely. We look at the left back class, also a highly touted class going into the super draft. There's one player who I think showed well at the combine, John Gallagher out of Penn State, your alumni. He did really well. I think he is a big enough left back, showed good skill. That's what impressed me.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll say about Gallagher, as we talk about players who need time to develop, he's only been playing left back for about a year. So when I talked to his coach, Bob Warming from Penn State, he said, this was a guy who I had to find a place for him. I had to find the right place where he'd go on the next level, and he really believes in him as an MLS level player. It's just that he doesn't have the experience at left back because he was one of those guys that started as a forward, moved to a left midfielder, finally found a spot at left back where he could really show himself. So he's still learning the game on the defensive side, and we saw a player very similar to this go in the super draft in Cory Kindle, who the Colorado Rapids took. Another player with very similar attributes. Kindle, I think, has a little bit more upside when you look at his overall athletic ability, but John Gallagher, to me, looks like a guy who in a year or two down the road with the proper training will be a solid starting left back on an MLS team.
We look at other names on this list. Chris Thomas, he is the leading scorer in the college ranks out of Elan. I thought he had a great combine. Someone's going to really find the next Wondolowski in Chris Thomas, because what we saw at the combine was a player who knew how to find spaces and knew how to just to ghost around in the box. And there's something special about this guy. Even back to goal, goal. Even for not being the strongest of forwards, he did well back to goal as well. Knew exactly how to play the position. He's an expert forward, I think, on the next level. He can be groomed. We talk about guys getting time in the reserve league. With enough time, he can be the next Wondolowski.
For me, I know that you're high on Chris Thomas, and I think he offers a lot. Anytime you see a guy who can score that many goals, the question is the competition. He played against some good teams, wasn't scoring all his goals against the top class
They
teams.
played excellent teams at Elan. You think of Elan and you don't think major program. They played the Dukes. They played the Wake Forest.
He didn't score against Duke, though, and he scored against Wake Forest, but they were on a down year. Look, I'm not totally dismissing him. What I'm saying is he can score goals. That's a great attribute. For me, he didn't show me a ton of soccer sense, and that's the kind of thing that I think needs to be developed over time and can be developed if he goes to the right team and they put him in the right situation where he's getting minutes for the reserve team. And that's the one thing to me is he just needs to get on the field. Somebody will take a chance on him for sure because of the amount of goals that he's scored. So I want to give everybody an update. New York Red Bulls have selected their first pick, and it is Ryan Clark, one of the guys that we spoke about out of Monmouth, a local product. He is a left-sided player for Monmouth. He played all over the field. He really was their attacking spark wherever he was on the field. He projects on the MLS level as a left defender or as a left midfielder. I think it's kind of up in the air on where he'll end up playing as a pro, right?
I love Ryan Clark. He was one of the players I had going in the Super Draft, and we saw
in the first round, no less.
He was a player we saw who had excellent technique, and we see some of it right there. Excellent left foot. He is definitely someone who could be useful in an MLS setting. They say he could possibly play left back, as you mentioned, left midfield. We saw him play center mid in the combine. Did fairly well. He has a good engine, so he'll keep up with MLS players, and he had good size about him. I think this is going to be a phenomenal player in MLS.
All right, so I don't know if he's going to go straight from supplemental draft to phenomenal, but that said, he is a solid pickup for a New York team, Simon, that has a lot of holes. When you look at their midfield especially, they have a lot of bodies to fill, really.
They need bodies, absolutely.
When you look at what the drafting of Ian Christensen made 5 natural midfielders on that team. Because you look at Brandon Barklage, he's been playing right back for a long time. He came out of college as a midfielder, and he's kind of moved back there. But when you look at the New York Red Bulls, that is a big pickup for them. When you talk about left-sided players, especially in the midfield, what else are they looking for here, and can they get it? I think is really the question.
Yeah, wide midfielders. I think keep looking for wild midfielders wide midfielders and center backs is the other one. I think they could use maybe 1 or 2 to bring up. I think, though, midfield continues to be the focus here. We look at some of the central mids still available. We hear a lot of good things about Sean Peckham out of Lafayette. Questions about his size, though. Mikkel David, who has, he's sturdy enough to play in MLS.
If you go just on the combine, David did not look good. He looked out of place wherever they put him on the field. That said, you look at his college career, he was a guy who was shifty, able to move with the ball at his feet, could score some goals. So it really will be a question, is there an MLS team that didn't get too turned off by what they saw at the combine from him?
Other outside mids, Mark Cintron out of Providence.
I like.
Andy Reamer. He's a player who showed decently for Georgetown. They have another 4 picks.
Where are they going to get that Mexican-American forward that they want? You can see when you look at the depth chart for Chivas USA, which we've drawn up, and we're gathering information as any fan is right now, trying to piece together these depth charts. But Chivas USA has a bunch of guys who've come in from Chivas Guadalajara. They're not big-name players, but a couple of guys who you think maybe will make the team.
Yes, I think for the majority will make the team. Based on what we're hearing, they're coming out as a trial, but they just want to make sure they can fit them in their current salary budget. And look, Chivas USA has a lot of work to do. And Chalice told us that this roster is still a work in progress. He wants to get rid of some salary. He wants to free up salary. And I think then you have these 5 players who are coming in from Chivas Guadalajara who will occupy that space.
I mean, the obvious choice here is Dan Kennedy. I think he's their biggest asset. Juan Agudelo as well, if he were to be sold abroad. I don't see see another trade in the works for Juan Agudelo. But when you look at it, is Dan Kennedy the guy that maybe they move to try to get some assets back?
I think he's one of them. Charles Joseph is going to be difficult to move, but I think they have decent players. Roshan McKenzie, Bobby Burling. There are teams that are going to want players like that. So I think they have elements that if they don't want to keep, I think they have value in MLS.
Okay, we have more picks coming in. Chivas USA has made their pick, and I know, Simon, this is a player that you like. Jose Diaz, the center back from UC Riverside. That's a player who showed some size, can play with the ball at his feet. A lot of guys high on him, and I know at one point you had him going in the Super Draft.
I did, because he is one of the rare central defenders in this pool who can play the ball. He's a playmaker from the back as a central defender. He had Tecos interested in him. He trained with Tecos. They wanted him back, so he is Mexican-American, fits the bill, and he plays with the ball at his feet. So I think he was a target for other MLS teams. I know San Jose liked him a lot, but he's a player that
continues. Portland selects David Neves from Akron, the goalkeeper that played under Caleb Porter for a while now. He played 3 seasons. We saw him. He was at the Combine. He was one of those guys that you saw playing for Akron for a while. I'm not sure either of us thought he would go in the Super Draft. Supplemental Draft makes sense, especially to Portland as potentially a third goalkeeper.
And he's a solid keeper based on everything we've heard. He makes the right decisions. He doesn't really have to show off at Akron, and so he comes away underrated maybe a little bit from spending time at that program, but obviously Caleb Porter knows him well, and those who watched him in close detail and watched him regularly say there's something there. He knows he's an expert at the position, but again, he didn't have to make any have incredible performances necessarily for Akron.
Right, and that was actually one of the knocks on when you look at Scott Goodwin, another goalkeeper from UNC. They said he played for such a good team. He didn't really have a ton to do. We're going to move on. The next pick went to the New England Revolution. They took a local product, Josimar Sanchez, a defensive midfielder from UConn, a player that a lot of people were high on. I know Matt Doyle really liked him. The question with him was he broke his leg during this season, and how well was he going to recover from that injury?
Josimar Sanchez, again, a guy who we hear is technically very able, and we know that Jay Heaps is building a technically proficient side, especially in that midfield. Look, they're going to be deep at that center mid position, but I think they had a chance to see this kid enough to know that he can fit in well in their system.
All right, moving on, the number 5th pick went to Seattle. This was via trade with Philadelphia, and they took Will Bates, another player who, as a youth player, was one of the top guys coming up, had an injury, kind of came back, and people said, there was really only 80% of what was there before. Will Bates, a target forward going to Seattle Sounders.
We had our questions going into the Combine because of that injury, but I think he showed well at the Combine. He showed that he can be that bruising forward up top, and Seattle, Siggy Schmidt told me he's looking for more forwards. So don't know if Will Bates has what it takes to be necessarily a starter from the top, from the start, but I think he's a guy that, it will be helpful. Athletically, he's strong, and he'll bang bodies. So I think in MLS, he'll be a good fit.
All right, we're going to keep moving on. The draft is moving fairly quickly. And after Will Bates, we had... Let me follow this for you.
LA
Galaxy up at 6. And is the pick Anthony Arena? I'm trying to get some help from our staff here. Oh, I'm sorry. Andy Reamer from Georgetown goes number 6 to the LA Galaxy. This is interesting. A player that I think I might have had in my mock draft going to the Galaxy at the end of the Super Draft. He's a player who played forward for Georgetown. Remember this very good Georgetown team this season. And they brought in Brandon Allen, one of the top. He was the freshman of the year in college, kind of pushed Reamer back. And basically what their coach said was, I needed to keep Reamer on the field, but he wasn't going to play forward at that point. point. So they pushed him out to right midfield, and he said that might be the best thing for him because that's where he's going to end up on the MLS level. And you look at a team like the LA Galaxy, who you can look at their depth chart right there, are trying to get some wide players. Even Charlie Rugg, who was a forward, they drafted to play him out wide right. So Reamer fits in there as another option to play out wide and create some width for this team.
And what we heard, one coach told us about how he's the sleeper of the draft, that he's that good. Great feet, good pace, works hard, kind of the perfect fit, and he's a technical enough player. I don't know if he has the pace to be a winger necessarily, but he could be one of those midfielders that converges.
Highly regarded, maybe a versatile midfielder who can play a couple different spots for them.
Yeah, injuries is the story for him, but he's left-footed, clever, confident on the ball. What else do we have on him here? Yeah, he's one of those where, because of the injuries, that's the big question mark. So tough to fully, get your rhythm back is what we were told. So, but again, Schellas Hyndman still very much in tune with the college game, and we'll have heard enough about Cameron Brown.
All right, the Montreal Impact were up at pick number 8, and they selected Hakan Elan. This was a player who we heard things about. A lot of people saying this is a guy who's going to get drafted.
Euro-centric Montreal team, and he has a background in Germany as well. But the interesting thing there is he's going to count as an international, and according to my count, Montreal has one spot left, so he's going to have his work cut out if he's going to wind up on this roster. All right, after Montreal, the Columbus Crew on the clock, and we know that the Crew were trying to pick up defenders and trying to add to their defense. And Simon, they got a guy that I know you really like from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, Reed Matta. Reed Matta is a right back, and he is one of those right backs that attacks. We had him as number 1 on our ranking of top right backs out of UAB. In what was a very weak right back class, we think, but you think he'll make an impact? Yes, because by all accounts, he's a guy who UAB, if you wanted to stop UAB, you looked at Reed Matta to stop, is what we heard from there. And that he makes things happen down the right side. So he's a right back that we thought might be headed elsewhere in MLS. Rumors were that he might have been headed to the Pacific Northwest, but he ends up in Columbus, and that's a great pickup for the Crew, who wind up with a Drew Becky, who also was a right back in college, but you think that maybe he was a guy who's going to be a central defender now for the Columbus Crew, has the size to be a central defender. The Crew obviously picking up a new central defender in Glauber today, but Drew Becky, we're going to slot him in there, and then Reed Matta now at wide right back. So when you look at this team, this defense that Columbus has now put together and bringing in the big Brazilian, are they done there?
Are they set? They have enough with what they have put together on this roster now?
I believe so. I believe they're ready to go into the year as is, especially if Reed Matta can show in training camp that he's a player who can contend for minutes, then I think they're set. Otherwise, right back, I only have Josh Williams here. Chad Barson can play some right back, so they can get by at right right back. But I think they're going to want an upgrade there if possible, if Reed Matty doesn't show that he can start right away.
I mean, I think it shows how desperate Columbus was in the back of the field, that they were trying Ethan Finley and Bernardo Arnour, left midfielder and right forward, I guess you could say, slash midfielder at outside back. So we don't know if those experiments will come through, but for now, it looks like, we're slotting them in there. I'm going to move on with the draft. At 10 and 11, was Vancouver. They took two guys out of Notre Dame, Adam Mena and Mikkel Rose, both out of Notre Dame. So Rose, a midfielder forward. Interesting for Martin Rennie going back to the Notre Dame. I mean, they have Greg Klazora on that roster already. They took Bilal Duckett last year, remember, was on their roster. So a close connection between the Vancouver Whitecaps and Notre Dame.
Let's be honest. I mean, these players didn't figure in our initial list of top prospects. So we'll see what Vancouver has in store here. These names come a little bit coming out of left field for us.
And another player who, Simon, we talked about at the beginning of the show, going number 12 to the Philadelphia Union, it's Eric Schonely, a guy who we talked about. He's a center back. He's slight, but he's a player who you're very high on in terms of his technical abilities.
Yeah, no, I think he's going to be a very effective player in MLS. And look, we're looking at a center back core for the Philadelphia Union that has Jeff Park, Bakary Soumare, Amobi Akugo. So Schonely can come into MLS with no real pressure to perform right away. He can try to get a feel for the league, get a feel for how strong you have to be. And look, we've seen center backs get by with not being the strongest, but they figure it out. They figure positioning, and they just learn forwards in the league, and they can do it. So
as long as you're partnered with somebody that it can take some of that physical, play away from you, that makes good sense. So New York up after Philadelphia at pick 13, and they take a player we talked a lot about during the combine, Michael Bustamante from Boston University. Really the question becomes, where are they going to look to play Bustamante? We think he'll have a shot at making the roster, no doubt. I mean, is he a midfielder on the MLS level?
I think he's a midfielder before he's a right back. I mean, we saw him play right back at the combine for the very first time in his career. But it was an attacking type midfielder in college. Why not be a backup for Juninho now? The Red Bulls' new number 10, the playmaker Juninho. The only thing about Bustamante that I have questions about is when he gets the ball, does he have that change of pace, that acceleration to get away from defenders and defensive midfielders in MLS? That's my question. But again, he was around the ball a lot. He knew where to be on the field. So an interesting prospect.
All right, up after them was Sporting Kansas City, and this has to be one of the hardest teams to make this season. When you look at their roster that Peter Vermees has put together, they're going to be playing in the Champions League. They won the U.S. Open Cup last year. So this is a team that's going to be playing a lot of games. They're going to need their players to be able to make an impact. They go out and they draft a player out of the NIA, Christian Duke. The NIA obviously is underneath the NCAA, but we've seen players come out of there before that have made an impact for their team. I'm not going to lie to you, I don't know much about him, so this is a guy we'll see during the preseason for the first time, along with a lot of fans. He is local to KC. Maybe some of the KC fans know. I'm going to throw out the next pick at 15 was San Jose. They took another local product, and you'll see this a lot through the supplemental draft. Adam John out of Stanford, a forward, a guy who I don't know where he fits on the San Jose roster, but he'll certainly show up for training camp and see what they can get out of him.
He's a bigger forward. He's a banger type, good in the air.
Does San Jose like those kind of guys?
He's a little bit slower, though, is what we heard out of him. But he does a good job holding the ball, connecting with players up top. So, again, he's going to be one of those strong athletic forwards. Someone compared him, actually, one coach we spoke to a Steven Lenhart type. So he's going to, again, bring it at forward as we've seen other forwards here with San Jose.
All right, we got a question coming in from Twitter. I want to remind everyone you can tweet at us with the hashtag supplemental draft. I believe that's correct, right? Somebody? Yep, I got an affirmative. So hashtag supplemental draft with any of the questions you have for us. And from SJO Stopper. How would you rate Reed Matta for Columbus, Simon? You can give us your take, because if he's a Columbus fan, he definitely wants to hear something good, and I know you're going to speak well about him.
Yeah, I just gave you a rundown, very high on him. We had him, again, I put him at number 1 on our right back list here going into the Super Draft. Someone says he's not borderline. He's definitely making it in MLS according to one. He's the thick kind of player, a good defender, and can serve an excellent ball from the flank. So I think we're looking at a right back here who's going to make a name for himself in the league.
All right, up at number 16 was the Seattle Sounders. I'm still waiting for confirmation on their pick, which has been made. So we will get back to you on that. And I'm going to look at a player, Simon, who was selected a couple of picks later. And we'll get back and catch you up on the picks before if you need it. Ashton Bennett finally going at number 19 in this draft to Toronto FC. Ashton Bennett, a player, again, he's Jamaican, but also has Canadian residency. That's probably what kept the U.S. teams away from him, but he seems a valuable prospect when it comes to the Canadian teams.
Yeah, the Coastal Carolina forward here showed really well at the Combine. He was arguably the most dangerous forward there. Just knew where to be in the box, made good runs. He's quick enough to get by defenders and has excellent technique. We're seeing it in these images here, the footage here of his highlights. So is he on the smaller side? Sure. But I think for Toronto FC, they have the big forwards in Justin Braun, Eric Hasley, Danny Kouvermans. So he could be helpful. He could also possibly fill in at, on either flank, on either wing. We saw him play a little bit right wing. Also, he played attacking mid at the Combine. So he can do it all. He's an overall good attacker on the small side, though, but he's quick.
I'm going to go back to picks 16 and 17, Simon, because there's a player there that I know we'll want to talk to. 16, the Seattle Sounders take Kevin Durr, player from Air Force, who we heard a lot of great things about. The following pick at number 17 was Philadelphia, and Philadelphia took Uriah Bentic out of Liberty. Let's give fans real quick the info on Kevin Durr, though, because we heard from a lot of people. I think we might have both had him going in the Super Draft, I think to Seattle as well, late in the Super Draft, and they're the ones who end up taking him. They saw plenty of him playing for Air Force.
They did. He has an interesting background, Durr does. He played at Bayer Leverkusen and Bayern Munich in Germany in their youth system. And he was, as in that system, he still got the eye of U.S. national team scouts. So he was in the U.S. national team system. But as far as what he did at Air Force, this guy was a box-to-box midfielder, made things happen for Air Force, and he was just... a really good player, and he just has a nose for the game that you can imagine from a player who has that kind of pedigree, having played with Bayern Munich's youth team. So he's a player. The question here, and we've yet to have answered, is what kind of commitment might he have in the armed forces here?
Right.
So that's the big question mark. But as far as a talented player, he's a great pickup in the supplemental draft. You wish you could find these kind of players.
All right, going through the second round of the supplemental draft, we mentioned Ashton Bennett going to Toronto at pick 20. Pick 21, Chivas USA take another local player out of California, Joe Franco. Joe Franco, one of the top right back prospects from what we heard. Another player injured. Questions were, was he going to be able to get back on the field and get healthy?
Franco, a guy who technically very proficient. He can play the ball from his right back position. Very calm and composed is what we hear about this player. He doesn't have the size necessarily to bang bodies, but in terms of ball at his feet, he makes things happen. Some had him as the best right back in the draft. We had him, I think, at around number 5 going in, but he did his ACL coming back from that. But again, he's also a Mexican American in terms of his background, so he's a good find for Chivas USA. They picked up 2 excellent defenders here in Jose Diaz and now Joe Franco, sticking to their policy of Mexican Americans.
Yeah, you're liking what Chivas USA has been able to do with what we assumed was little time to prepare for the Super Draft. Pick 22, second round, goes to Portland. It's Chris Henge out of Ohio State. And it's an interesting player, Simon, because I remember years ago back at the Sum Cup where the MLS U17 teams were playing, we saw Chris Henge stuck out playing for DC United. DC had the option to sign him as a homegrown, but did not. They chose not to. It's interesting that Portland takes him because he's kind of that big forward, similar mold to Bright Dike. We know Chris Boyd is out, and when you look at the depth chart here, we're not sure really where Jose Adolfo Valencia will fit in on this team. So does Henge really have a shot here maybe to make this roster behind Bright Dike?
Well, we'll give you some of the feedback we have. Aside from his DC United background, one coach mentioned he has all the physical tools, but it all doesn't add up. Someone said his speed of play perhaps is a question mark, but he's a big guy. Another coach says, think he's okay. He's a handful, but when you do a scouting report and you focus on him, you can contain him. So a little bit of a question mark about this pick by some, but we'll see how he hashes it out there.
Well, he went one pick before another forward, Simon, that I know you like. Going to New England Revolution, it's Chris Thomas, the goal scorer from Elan. So the Revolution continue to add forwards. We know that Sayer Sen is going to miss the beginning of the season because of injury. So Chris Thomas with a chance to make it. Luke Spencer, remember, was taken in the Super Draft. Give everyone the rundown on Chris Thomas as you look at him scoring goals for Elan.
I think he's going to be a good fit. He's a different type of player compared to the forwards they have on their roster right now. He's a guy who sniffs out positions. I compare him to a Chris Wondolowski based on what I've seen. He makes those runs. He knows where to be. And then when the ball gets to him, he knows what he's going to do with it. So that's why he's going to be, to me, he has the potential to be a good goal scorer in MLS. And like we said, he's a different player compared to guys they have. Jerry Bankston is more, the tall, speedy guy. Diego Fagundes, again, making things happen off the dribble. That's not Chris Thomas's game. Dimitri Mbongo, more of the big body. Sayer Sen also wants to maybe start out wide. He doesn't want to be the box guy necessarily. Right. Chris Thomas wants to live in the box. So I think he gives them an excellent, different look here.
Out of Thomas and Luke Spencer, who both go to New England, which forward do you like more in terms of making the roster, maybe having an impact this season?
I think both make the roster. I really do. Luke Spencer maybe has a bit of a more of a fight because he has to get by the Mbongo and Sayer Sen and Bankston, again, who fit that same mold of the big forward who is very technical and can dribble by people. So Luke Spencer maybe has the more uphill battle. Chris Thomas, a different profile of a forward for me and an excellent pickup by New England.
All right, we're going to continue going through this Super Draft. We're in the second round. Very high on him, but he's shown why he can be an MLS player. He's very shifty, has a lot of speed. Even in college coaches last year weren't that high on Antoine Hapano. So give us the take on Mark Linville. Obviously the Philadelphia Union have seen Princeton play enough to know what he's like on the field.
We'll give you some of the rundown of the scouting report we have on him. Pretty safe, mistake-free center back. A guy who's known for a long throw-in, was a special player for them. Not the fastest of guys, but again, a little slow, but he manages the position well. So overall, he didn't stand out for us because maybe athletically he wasn't there. Questions about whether he can keep up with some of the speedier forwards in MLS. But his overall game, pretty solid.
All right, moving on from Linville, a player, Simon, who I did not think would get drafted, but he's got a shot now. Brenton Griffith out of USF. He is a center back, Jamaican center back. Really where I was worried about him is, and this is actually some of the feedback that we got from coaches, he's a red card waiting to happen. Yeah. He's a guy who's athletically all there, has all the pieces, can run with you, can jump with you, but the decision making generally is poor.
Yeah, that's exactly the rundown we got about him, that in college, because athletically he was so strong, he was able to make up for mistakes he made. That positionally, he was challenged, didn't necessarily know where to be. So a little bit of a questionable pick here, I think, by Colorado. I think maybe if you're going to use an international slot here, why not try to shoot for a more technically proficient player, a guy who can play the ball. We assume Oscar Pareja going here for a style about playing the ball. So, with Jose Diaz off the board, with Chivas USA picking him up, maybe their hands were a little tied, but there was a Marcelo Castro from Sacred Heart who could have been an interesting pick. What else here? But look, he's going to be a good body for them to have in the middle there. You look at their center backs core right now: Drew Moore, Marvell Wynn, Nate Sturgis, and Diego Calderon. So he brings athleticism, I think, to that back line in case Marvell Wynn isn't there, or maybe Marvell Wynn has to play right back.
Okay, we're going to catch you up a little bit here. 25, Kyle Vilbeck from Valparaiso goes to Dallas. 26, Jordan LeBlanc from Old Dominion goes to Montreal. 27, Daniel Withrow going to from Marshall going to Columbus. That's a goalkeeper that we saw at the Combine. Simon, did he stick out to you at all?
He made it. Actually, there were a couple saves that he made that were really interesting. I think. I think he is one of those guys who we hear about, overall solid keeper, makes his saves. He was actually in the top 5, my top 5 of goalkeepers heading into the Super Draft. So interesting pick by Columbus there.
All right, moving on. Vancouver takes Brian Rogers from Harvard. And then at 29, Chicago Fire take left back out of Penn State, John Gallagher. Again, this is a player we were high on that we saw. Surprised to see him slip this low, but is he a guy who can help the Fire out?
I think absolutely, especially if maybe they even use him at left midfield and spell him there, because right now they have Joe Lindper and Yazida Tuba, their other pickup. But John Gallagher is going to be a guy. Look at their left back position. You have Gonzalo Segares and Hunter Jumper. I think Hunter Jumper, after a year playing reserves, from what I remember of him as well in his college days, he's a guy you got to project might be getting more time. So maybe John Gallagher, waiting in the wings to take over eventually in that sub position.
We did see Hunter Jumper a couple times come in for the Chicago Fire in the midfield. So it is possible that, again, either Gallagher could be used in the midfield or Jumper could end up being used in the midfield. Moving on, Vancouver at 30 selects Adam Clement from Duquesne. At 31, it's Ben Fisk from Washington going to the New York Red Bulls. Ben Fisk, one of those right backs, could be a defensive midfielder, could be a right back out of the University of Washington. Is he a player you see more in the midfield or more on the back line?
Midfielder, according to what I was able to gather from coaches. Interesting pick. Wasn't perhaps the top prospect out of Washington. I think that fell to Dylan Tucker Gagnes, who was taken in the Super Draft. But tough, tenacious, tackling midfielder is the word we have on him. Played holding mid for Washington. Could be good in a 2 holding setup. He's a warrior is what we have here. He works hard. He's a tackler. And he passes the ball to the first guy he sees. So he could be a good man to spell Dax McCarty. It sounds like he's another Dax McCarty here. Perhaps not as technically gifted as McCarty, but a hard worker who covers ground.
Okay, moving on, going to pick 32, the rich get richer here. Sporting Kansas City is an interesting pick that I like. Mitchell Cardenas out of Campbell. I want you to take a look at his highlights, because this is a player who has some field vision. There's questions maybe about his pace and physical ability, but he's a guy who can spread the ball around the field. And, doing it for Campbell, you're a little off the radar. You remember Richard Jota coming out of there. If you looked at his highlight film playing for Campbell, it looked amazing, but he ended up not making the Fire. So is Cardenas a player who could maybe make an impact here, making an MLS team?
And if there's a team that can whip guys into shape, it's definitely Sporting Kansas City. But interesting what we've heard from people. We have one of the longest scouting reports on him. One of the best big players in the Big South. Offensively brings a lot to the table. Floats around everywhere in midfield. Good size, good ideas. Strength is very good as well. Could be a sleeper, according to one coach. Another coach saw him more as a finesse guy, but definitely he is a number 10 now as we look into people that Sporting Kansas City has on the next level.
All right, when we move on, looking at the next pick for the New York Red Bulls, they took Mark Cintron from Providence. Now, here's a player who I think projects to be an outside right midfielder. I liked him, Simon. You were not as high on him. But we said the Red Bulls, they need to put bodies in their midfield. I think this is a great pickup this late in the supplemental draft.
Yeah, what impressed me most about him was his size. I think he'll be, and he's technically pretty good on the ball. What I wanted to see more out of him was creating stuff. I don't know that when he had the ball at his feet, whether he created enough at the combine. And also, I thought he was muscled off the ball a little too easy. And I thought his stock dropped at the combine because of that. He didn't like the physical confrontation. But he's a player who can line up on that right side. We talked about the Red Bulls needing to shore up their midfield there and get guys who can fill spots. I think he's in that list of right mids when you look at the Brandon Barklages and the Lloyd Sams. So I think he might be a good fit.
All right, I want to get some more of these questions coming in from Twitter. Remember, you can tweet with the hashtag MLS Supplemental, right? Or Supplemental Draft.
Supplemental Draft.
All right, getting some help here. Supplemental Draft, hashtag Supplemental Draft. Dr. Angelo Love on Twitter writes, will John Gallagher stick in Chicago?
I think he will. I think that a left-footed player like him, you value. So while we were talking about whether they're already too deep there with Gonzalo Segares and Hunter Jumper, but I think you can never have too many left-footed players. And as we said, Gallagher could also play at left mid. We don't know how long Joe Limper will be on this team. He'll be with them obviously for this year, but he's more experienced, a little bit slower. I thought lost a step over the last couple of years. So Gallagher brings a little athleticism to that position in case you don't want to go with the smaller Yazida Tuba, and Gallagher can help play that containment type left mid position for you.
All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit for a couple more players who I think we liked at some point. Evan Rayner, UCLA, going to DC United at 36, and he's a player who can play wide in the midfield, but you liked him, Simon.
I had him going in the super draft, last pick to LA, because he's one of those overall technically solid midfielders who covers a lot of ground as well. They said that he never got out of the shadow of Ryan Hollingshead, who ended up being taken by FC Dallas. But he's a busy midfielder who makes things happen. So I think excellent pickup.
All right, Colorado, we thought, actually, picks 37, 38 are interesting to me. Colorado takes Stefano Pinot, the Brazilian striker. As many of you know, there are youth internationals that were brought to the combine. Stefano Pinot, one of those internationals, scored 3 goals at the combine. Nothing overly impressive, but sometimes you make an impact in a short period of time and coaches notice you.
It seemed that whenever the ball fell to him around the box, he was there and he knew what to do with it and finished off well. We see him here, ball gets to his feet, a little awkward bounce, still able to finish. Technically, he's excellent. We didn't see the best of him at the combine because he admitted to me that he was far from being fit, that the last real game he played was in August, but otherwise it was just training. He wasn't match fit. So Stefano Pinot, an interesting pickup here. Again, we talk about Oscar Pareja wanting to play technical soccer here. Pinot could be a replacement there for Jaime Castrillon. He's a left-footed player, and you like guys who can play on the left wing.
All right, looking ahead in this draft, Simon, Toronto at picks 38 and 39. At 38, interesting pick. Jose Gomez, one of the finalists for Player of the Year in college soccer. He is an international. He's of Mexican descent. So that could be why teams stayed away, but they also may have stayed away because he's a player that doesn't have a position. They took a chance last year on Luis Silva, obviously early. Silva made an impact. He was probably a little more of a sure bet than Gomez, but this is an interesting chance that they're taking.
Depending who you talk to in the college scene, some had him as a surefire pick. Others questioned him because they didn't think he had enough physically to make an impact. He fell into that category of number 10 guys who, do they have a spot, as you said, in MLS? Physically, though, did not impress at the combine. He vanished in games, frankly. So didn't take control of a match. But in terms of technique and being able to play, he's an excellent pickup. I don't know, though, how he fits in to this new Toronto FC team.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the feedback that I got on Gomez was he's a guy who makes passes that college players just don't make. So again, you have to find a place to put him on the field, but you figure with Toronto playing with Frings and Julio Cesar in central midfield, maybe if you're down a goal, and Toronto fans probably have been familiar with that over the past couple seasons, you bring him on late in the game and he can spring that guy who was playing up front.
And let's be honest, they don't have number 10 types. Luis Silva, to me, he's more of one of those attackers who wants to score goals and get forward. Gomez is going to be a guy who will like to sit in that attacking midfield position and, as you said, dish passes out. Luis Silva, I don't think, fits in that mold, which is why we have him here in our depth chart as a support forward. He's more of a guy who wants to be in the box.
Yeah, there's a typo there. Danny Kouvermans obviously would be the other starter up top with Luis Silva. Interesting what Toronto has there, though. With Kouvermans and Hasley, we've heard that Hasley maybe wants out in Toronto. But remember, when Kouvermans played last year, he scored more goals per minute, I think, than anyone except maybe Alan Gordon. So it'll be interesting. Does he get back onto the field? Is he healthy? And then what do they do around him?
And I think they're off to a good start. Ashton Bennett, we talked about, a buzzing type forward who can play off of a big man. And then you have a Jose Gomez who, as you said, maybe when the game, you need someone to help resolve a tough game. Maybe you're trying to get it back into it and a team is bunkering in on you. Jose Gomez comes in and can find that pass and pick out those passes.
All right, well, some of the teams are helping us as they get into the third round and passing on their picks so we can try to catch you up. Nick Robson out of New Mexico went to Toronto with the first pick in the third round. Chivas USA then passed. Portland passed. I mean, you look at Portland's roster, they have so many players there already. It will be interesting to see who actually ends up on the final roster. At 42 in the third round was Alex Dijon from Old Dominion. Philadelphia, that pick went to New England. Philadelphia then taking Jake Keegan from Binghamton. That's not a very, a school that a lot of people know about or have seen a lot from. But Jake Keegan's one of those guys who, to me, maybe reminds you of Antoine Hapano, one of those forwards that buzzes around, finds ways to score goals. Not overly impressive in the way he scored goals, but could it translate to the MLS level? Similarly to Chris Wondolowski. Wondolowski will be the first guy to tell you, hey, I'm a goal poacher, but I'm making a career out of it.
We'll tell you what some people said about Jake Keegan out of Binghamton. A very good goal scorer. He'll drift off people's shoulders and finish in front of goal. He's tremendous. Weakness is his link play and how he brings other into play. But in the box, he's dynamite, said one coach. Real live wire, a lot of energy, buzzes around, handful, constant work rate. Questions about whether all that on the college level translates into MLS. But he's coming off a good season in the PDL as well. An honest player is what we hear out of him.
All right, at number 44 to Colorado goes Mikkel David from University of California, Santa Barbara. This is a player we talked a little bit about earlier. Not a very good combine. In fact, if you just took him from his college career, maybe he goes a little higher. I think some coaches saw him at the combine and just couldn't figure out where he fit in.
He had a spell at right back, if you remember, so who knows if Colorado perhaps sees him as a right back. They look pretty set at the central mid position, Colorado does, so I think maybe right back might be the spot he gets a look at here. As we said, with Colorado, they don't have many options at right back right now, so Mikkel David, Davey Armstrong is the only one I have listed. Obviously, Drew Moore can slot out there, and Luke Vercolone is on trial, but who knows that he can be a good fit there.
All right, I'm going to get to another Twitter question. This comes from Alex Walters on Twitter. A teammate of Scott Goodwin's, perhaps, goalkeeper. Don't you think Scott Goodwin is an underrated goalkeeper in this draft? I know he had a great defense, but he is unreal. I mean, he made some great saves at the Combine, Simon, but is it enough to get him into an MLS camp? Is it enough to get him selected here?
I think when we're looking at the class of goalkeepers that are left, you're looking at guys who are prospects for that third string string position, possibly second string. But Scott Goodwin falls under that in that category of overall solid keepers like a David Mevis from Akron, who just get the job done. So I think if you're looking at him as a third keeper on your team, sure, you give him a shot.
All right, a little undersized from what people say, but he did have the highest vertical at the combine, so he makes up for it in athletic ability. Going through a couple more picks. At number 45, FC Dallas takes Cam Walder from Kentucky. At 43, 46 and 47, Montreal takes Luciano Del Bono from Wake Forest, and also Juan I'm not one for pronunciation. Juan Monge Solano from VCU. I'll give you a little on Del Bono, a midfielder from Wake Forest, is a guy who questions about whether he can make it on the MLS level, but he does have the technical ability. He is a guy who can pass the ball around well, maybe not athletically going to overpower anyone, but again, at this point in the supplemental draft, you're trying to take a chance on a guy that you've seen over the years, who's maybe shown you a little bit in terms of, a flash here, a flash there, and you try to bottle it up and get him in during the preseason camp.
We don't know much about Juan Solano, but we didn't get to talk about him, but Jordan LeBlanc out of Old Dominion, their pick before these two picks, for me, excellent pickup here by the Montreal Impact. From what I've seen of this player, what an excellent technical player who absolutely knows what to do at defensive midfield. He's going to be an excellent player, I think, in MLS. Again, fits in that technical first player that Montreal here, I think they're building a team like that, so a technically proficient team. LeBlanc is a great find.
All right, moving through the draft at 48, the Vancouver Whitecaps took Joshua Patterson from Duquesne. At 49, the Chicago Fire take James Belshaw from Duke. And Simon, when we were at the Combine, we just talked about Scott Goodwin. Also in the ACC, James Belshaw really impressed us at the Combine. From everyone we spoke to leading into the Combine, they said he is the best goalkeeper in the ACC. The ACC is probably the best conference in college soccer. So not a surprise that he gets taken, except for the fact that he does take up an international roster spot.
And the Fire have international spots to burn. They just had a couple guys get their green card. I think it was Arne Friedrich the other day. So they can afford to bring in Belshaw. But my question is, in Chicago, they're going to need to stop just giving the number one role, the number one jersey, to Sean Johnson. You have two excellent keepers now in Paolo Tornaghi, the Italian, and now James Belshaw. You have two international spots occupied by goalkeepers. Make this a real competition for that number one slot. I thought Paolo Tornaghi didn't do anything to force him to give up that spot to Sean Johnson when Johnson returned from the Olympics. So I think let's see if this is going to be a real competition at goalkeeper for Chicago.
All right, I'll remind the audience you can continue to tweet questions at us using the hashtag MLS.
Supplemental Draft.
I can't get this hashtag right for my life. Hashtag Supplemental Draft. You can send us questions. Moving on through the draft, Real Salt Lake at pick 50 take Brock Granger from Louisville, a player who we had heard about. Not surprised to see him go in the supplemental draft. From him when you watched him at the Combine, because a little known player out of Tampa.
Yeah, out of Tampa. Nothing that impressed me at the Combine necessarily. He played at both right back and center back. Didn't really do anything to show up bad. I mean, he didn't have any one mistake that you looked at him and said, okay, this is not an MLS player, but didn't do anything to really get on the map, in my opinion. So interesting pickup. The Kansas City clearly saw something in him.
All right, going through the picks, I have at 53 to San Jose, Colin Mitchell, Oregon State. At 54, Seattle, Lebagon Mulatto. This is another player who we didn't know much about, coming out of Lindsey Wilson in the second division, but did well to hold the ball, use his body in the midfield, made a couple good passes. didn't overwhelm us at the Combine playing against Division I players, but does have a good highlight reel when you take a look at it from what he was able to do with Lindsey Wilson.
Yeah, I thought that at the Combine maybe he was a little bit sloppy with the ball, didn't really know what to do, but he didn't. I think he didn't take the opportunity at the Combine and show well enough. So Leblanc Melota there from Lindsey Wilson.
All right, DC United passed. They are done with this draft. The Houston Dynamo then take Nick Ryan from UCSB. LA passed. They're done with the draft. And then Toronto up again takes Taylor Morgan from George Mason. This is another interesting guy who, if he didn't count as an international, maybe gets taken a little earlier. You can see what he can do here in terms of his size and his ability on the ball.
George Mason, Taylor Morgan, coached by former MLS coach Greg Andrulis at George Mason. We didn't hear much about him. Weren't able to garner enough about him from George Mason, but we're seeing the highlights here. Again, Toronto FC all attacking with their picks here. Ashton Bennett, we mentioned, Jose Gomez, and now Taylor Morgan shoring up that attack, which you got to figure those Eric Hasley rumors. Maybe there's right. Where there's smoke, there's fire in terms of trying to rebuild that attacking core. They're doing it a lot through the draft here. Emery Welshman, Kyle Becker, another attacking midfielder.
All right, moving on. Chivas USA and Portland had already passed. They are out. New England with pick 61 takes Gabe Latigue from Elon. And Simon, I know you're a big Elon supporter with Chris Thomas there as well. So what can the fans expect to see from Gabe Latigue?
Gabe Latigue provided most of the assists that Chris Thomas had. He's a guy who, again, has good vision, excellent with the ball at his feet, delivers a quality set piece. His ability on set pieces to score them and to serve was what coaches highlighted for us. And he operates on the wing. He's a drifter, but again, technically excellent. The question about him was athletically. Can he keep up? Does he have the pace to keep up in a high-paced game? But he's a guy maybe you bring on to help you get that set piece, and deliver that way with his passing. Latigue, a passer.
All right, when we started the show, we mentioned some of the guys who were taken in the final round of the supplemental draft. Dan Kennedy, Chris Wondolowski, to name a few. So we are going through the final round of the supplemental draft. Another player that we heard a lot of good things about, Simon, when you look at Leo Fernandes from Stony Brook, kind of that second forward guy, maybe a little bit of a creator in the midfield. He goes to the Philadelphia Union. What are the Philadelphia Union hoping to get out of him?
Well, we'll give you a little bit about what we got on him. Three-time midfielder of the year in his conference. Left-footed, ideally plays behind the forward here. Quality, very good, technical, good vision, good soccer IQ. Definitely a handful in games he had. One coach we spoke to at a real big program said he is a real sleeper. Classic number 10 against one team. So I think Leo Fernandes, he was on our top attacking midfielder list going into the Super Draft. Excellent pick.
As we move on, we're wrapping up the final picks of the final round in this supplemental draft. Marcelo Castro from Sacred Heart goes to Colorado. Simon, I know that's a player that you liked as a center back.
Yeah, I think he's going to compete with Brenton Griffiths for that one spot. You're not going to have two rookie central defenders that occupy an international slot. I think it's going to be a battle between those two. They both have good size, but the Brazilian here is more of a player on the ball, who's going to be able to do well. Scored a lot of goals for Sacred Heart as well.
All right, a little more of a soccer player probably than Griffith, less of an athlete though. Moving on, FC Dallas takes TJ Nelson from SMU, a player who at the college level played a lot in the midfield, but at the Combine we saw him as a right back, and I got to figure if he's going to make it on the MLS level, it's probably going to be at a right back, and now
no way. I think Schellas Hyndman has seen enough of him, knows him. He's an SMU guy. I think they'll look at him as a D-mid, a guy who can connect passes, maybe a little more refined. I don't know what Lucien is going to bring, the new guy who played with Atletico Madrid in Spain, but he's a little more refined and wants to connect the passes, wants to play a possession game.
I have to say I'm shocked that it took this far into the supplemental draft for Simon and I to disagree, but I'm sure we're not done. Let me get to one more question from Twitter before we get to the final picks of the draft. This is from Greg Fingers, and he says, if someone does not get chosen in the supplemental draft, what avenue do they have to join a team?
A tryout. Basically, the hope is that a coach likes them enough to invite them to camp, and then they just walk their way on, almost like a college scenario where you walk on.
Yeah, essentially what it is the MLS team can kind of place a few discovery claims on undrafted players. Those players then get invited to camp and can try out. And really, I mean, in the end, have just as much chance of making it as somebody drafted in this last round. Let me go through the final picks. Montreal skipped their pick at 65. 66 to the Columbus Crew. Sean Sloan from High Point, an up-and-coming program at High Point, has produced some guys who've gotten drafted over the last couple years. Sorry. Vancouver at 67. Alejandro Sucre from Amherst. Chicago at 68. Caleb Costanzi from the Indiana Hoosiers, national champions there. Costanzi, a center back. Moving on, Max Wasserman from UConn went to Real Salt Lake at 69. He's a right back, again, from this, what we considered a weak right back class in MLS, but Wasserman was one of the higher rated guys. Interesting here, after they drafted Ian Christensen in the Super Draft, New York goes after Andrew Ribeiro, who's another defensive midfielder, although we've seen him play center back at times. Maybe that versatility helps him here for the Red Bulls.
Although, again, we talked about the shortage at midfield for the Red Bulls. You got to figure they're looking at him as a midfielder. And I didn't think at center back he looked so comfortable, but he's a defensive midfielder, I think, by the tendencies we saw. That's what he played at Creighton. He had to slot into center back because of injuries for Creighton this past year, but he's a player who is kind of a late bloomer, is what they told us about him, and who I think has good size for that defensive midfield role. And we saw that New York Red Bulls at defensive midfield now have Ben Fisk possibly competing with Ribeiro.
All right, I was actually really surprised that Ribeiro dropped this far in the draft. Remember, in the College Cup, he got a pretty bad injury, so he was still hurt at the Combine, didn't look that great. So I'm really surprised that teams didn't know that going in and say, you know what, I'll take a chance at him. We heard he could go as high
out wide. Speed is what this guy brings, and the Houston Dynamo now have come away with speedy guys, and with Jason Johnson obviously in the Super Draft. So a guy who can play on the right. Jason Johnson you have on the left, so you have some speed now, speed options for Houston on the wings.
All right, Simon, that wraps up the supplemental draft and our coverage. Of course, you could see the draft tracker on the site. You could see highlights of plenty of these guys. Just head over to MLSsoccer.com. You can also get a wrap-up. I believe Matt Doyle is giving his take on the winners and the losers from this supplemental draft.
Notice Eric Schonely. His name doesn't come up. Interesting.
Schonely did go. Schonely went earlier. We talked about him. Yeah, it's been that long, Simon.
Really?
Schonely went to Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, in the first round. But I know it's been a long day.
We've been trying to keep track here.
Cramming a lot of information into this hour.
Yes, he did. He went first to Philadelphia.
Surprisingly, the supplemental draft flew by and only took an hour. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us. We will continue coverage of the preseason on MLSsoccer.com, including plenty of live streams. Next week, we're going to be out in Arizona live streaming games. You can see some of these draft picks in action in their first appearances for their MLS teams. And then, of course, we'll have the Diamond Desert Cup out in Arizona in a few weeks. And then in Orlando, they are doing the Disney Soccer Classic again. We'll have all that streaming live on MLSsoccer.com.